Good afternoon. Thanks for joining us. My name is Chaz Henry, and I am the founder of PowerChalk.com. Today I'm joined by Bill Renner, and Bill is going to teach us how to kick a field goal. Bill is with us.
Yes, sir, Chaz. Thanks
All right,
for having me.
Coaches, Bill has been with us multiple times. He's a former kicker for the Green Bay Packers. He's a 25-year high school coach. You can find out more about Bill, and you can contact him directly at billrennerfootball.com. So, Bill, first question. Hitting a 100-mile-an-hour curveball, to me, looks very hard. I got to be honest with you. Watching someone kick a stationary football looks easy. So what am I missing?
Well, like anything, there's a point of contact on that football, and if you miss it by even as much as a quarter of an inch, it doesn't fly where you want. So obviously in baseball, hitting an object that's moving away from you, towards you, high or low, presents that challenge. But even if you put a baseball on a tee, you don't always hit it exactly like you want because you don't hit the contact point in the right spot. So the challenge is to as you're moving to the ball and as you're going to put your non-kicking foot in a position to strike it, is to do all that kind of stuff and hit the right spot on the ball. And that's what allows you to have to practice over and over, is to hit that right spot. So while it's stationary, it still doesn't mean that somebody can hit the right spot all the time. So that's what you see when people miss.
Now, is it really a quarter of an inch? Because it seemed to me, and that's part of what I was basing that initial reaction on, is that the size of a football versus the size of a baseball. They say a quarter inch is a pop-up versus a home run, but it seemed like the football would be more forgiving than that.
It is not. Only because the specific, you have to make it fly straight, first of all. And to do that, it's not as big a sweet spot as people think. Because you're coming in rotationally, you have to time that up right and sequence that up right so that you're square when you hit it, even though you're coming in rotationally. And that's really the biggest challenge, is to take that rotational, the rotation of your hips and square it up on your foot at the right time. So it's not as big a sweet spot as you imagine, and even when guys become very adept, missing it by 1/8 of an inch could be the difference in that ball being just inside the upright or hitting the upright. So it actually can be even more narrow than the quarter of an inch that I detailed as being the contact miss point.
Wow. So coaches, here's what we're going to do. We've asked Bill to go in, and we've also filmed a session with Bill working out with one of his high school kickers. And we've asked him to go in and also define the steps. Now these are the steps that you would mark if your son or daughter were doing place kicking, and you would mark them in order to compare them to another kicker. So this is really not judgmental. This is really about, and I'm not going to go through these frames. We'll do it in the actual telestrator. But these are the freeze frame moments, if you will. And what I'm going to ask Bill to do is take us through those. And we're looking right now at a high school kicker. This is Henry. And take us through those freeze frame moments. So I'm going to go ahead and put them up, starting with the relaxed position. And what I'm going to do, Bill, why don't you start and you just take us through the whole sequence while I put it in slow-mo.
Sure. The relaxed position is the position that Henry has already done to get to the spot where he wants to start to take his 2 steps to kick a football. There's some people that will take a trigger step and use their left foot, then their right foot, and then their left foot. But that's unnecessary. It doesn't add to the speed and power that you can generate to kick. So the relaxed position is a position that he's taking his steps back, his steps over, so that he can take 2 steps. And what the important part of that is that the steps mean you have done your aim right. What happens is kickers will take their steps back and steps over, and they forget that they've already aimed. And then as they go to the ball, they'll be trying to figure out, okay, where does my foot go so they can go straight. So in relaxed position, I tell them, you've just taken your steps. You are now aimed right. If you take your left foot and point it at the right position, as you can see here, Henry's got his left foot pointing to the left of the ball where he's going to put it. And that puts him on the right path. So get aim out of your mind. Relax, get the aim out of your mind, and now just start your approach to the ball and go make your swing. So that's what relax is. Now in stance, he's going to shift his weight so that about 80% of it is on the ball of his foot in his stance. So if you go back to where the stance is, a stationary position, Chaz, and that second key frame.
Sure.
Yeah. So what you see now is he's beginning to start. We don't want you to lean into your stance. So if you go from relaxed to stance and you lean to get there, then you can be off balance. So we want him to load his front foot in the stance with about 80% of his weight. Okay? By bending this front knee, keeping this front knee over the ball of his foot, and then his shoulders over his knees and knees over his toes. And he's going to stay nice and tall as he does that. So once he sets his stance, his upper body should not change as he goes to kick the football. All the movement's going to come from his lower body down. So in stance, we want to look and see that he's got weight on the front foot. In this case, a right-footed kicker, his left foot. Weight on the ball of his foot, his knee is over the ball of the foot. And then he can do a 2-foot push-off. So if you see Henry pushing there, he's pushing with both of his feet to get started. And that's the most efficient way and the most powerful way to go what I call from 0 to 60. That is, you're at 0 miles an hour in your stance, and you got to get to 60 miles an hour, so to speak, using the car analogy, when you kick. And 2-foot push-off is what you have to do with regard to that. So he's in a stance, keyframe 1. Now the first step that he takes is called the burst step, and that's going to stop right when he hits. He needs to hit on the ball of his foot only. We don't want him to hit flat-footed because then he'll be decelerating his body. And we can tell that because notice that his knee is right over his toe. So it stays, when he hits the ball of his foot, his knee is over his toes, so that means we know exactly where his weight is distributed, as you can see right there. And then once again, he's maintained his athletic position because if you stop it there, notice his shoulders are over his knee. So I know right now that he's loaded up and to maximize the amount of push that he's going to get from his first step. And the first step is what I call the burst step. When they hit that ball of that foot, they have to take their cleats and basically rip the ground out from underneath them so that they can generate the amount of speed with their body that they need. The leg speed is directly tied to the body speed. So if they go slow through their steps and they come up short, one of the things you can do is just get them to go quicker to the ball. And I do a drill called quick feet drill before I even ever let them hit a ball. And I make them do it, every time before they kick, just to make sure that their body is in balance, their posture is right, and that they have the right speed to swing their leg with. So the first step
there you see the turf flying, Coach. It strikes me, and this keeps coming up, as we go through different sports and different motions, that once again we're translating linear motion into rotational motion.
Yes. Yep, that's what he's going to do. And so you can actually see the ground rip up there. So he's really pushing hard off his first step. Okay, but notice how still the upper body stays when he does that. So now I've been training Henry pretty much on a weekly basis since April or May when we started. So I've been fortunate to get him every week. And he just got finished with his football season, but I still had him on Sundays there. So he's really learned how to stay stable and just use his lower body. So the next one he comes in with a non-kicking foot step, that's the accelerator step. And what you see here is he comes in heel to toe. Okay, so he comes in, his heel hits, and then he's going to roll from his heel to his toe. Okay, now I call it the accelerator step, and you see Chaz had a plant foot up there, and I don't use that term because it gives the kicker the idea that when he puts his foot in the ground, it's stationary, and that's not really what happens. So if you take it back to when his heel hits, okay, remember we talk about where's the weight distributed in our foot. So right now, his knee is right over top of his heel, and that's where the weight is. But he's got to slide his knee to the ball of his foot. As you see there, that transfer has to take place. Otherwise, he'll only be kicking with his leg, and he won't be able to accelerate his hips up into the ball. So if you were watching your kicker when they hit that non-kicking foot step, that knee needs to slide back over the ball of his foot. So now I know where the weight is when he makes contact with the ball, okay? So that accelerator foot is now heel to toe, slide the knee back over the ball of the foot, and keep your upper body stable while you do this. A lot of kids in this phase will start to crunch. Now, Henry has a little bit of a shoulder roll, not a crunch, because you see his waist or his abs there are going to pull his hips through, and he's not crunching over his body to make that happen. He's just rolling his shoulders to come back to balance. That's all he's doing. So that's a real good position. At the accelerator step, that's a real good position for him. He slid his knee, he stayed tall, and now he's starting to rotate his foot into the ball. The next position is the ball contact position, okay? At ball contact, he has to be tall behind the ball, is the coaching phrase that I use. Notice right there that his upper body is behind the ball, his hips are behind the ball, and the only thing moving is the leg extension that he's doing at the knee. Just like if he was on a leg extension machine, he's extending into the ball, and his quad is contracting, his hamstring is extending, and the leg locks out. At contact, that's what you should see. You should see him nice and tall behind the ball. You can see that he has good laser eyes on the spot that he wants to hit, okay? So his eyes are just locked into the spot on the ball that he wants to hit. The other thing that's really important, if you go back to, Chaz, let's go back to the one before that in the accelerator. I want to point out the leg load that he needs, okay? So notice now that in this accelerator foot keyframe, that his right kicking leg is bent. So he's going to use his quad to snap through the ball. Now what you would see there, go back just a little bit, and you'll see his leg. A lot of kids right there, stop it for me, Chaz. A lot of kids will just pull with their hip flexor from that position. And if you have a soccer-style kid, most of the time that's what they're going to do because they sweep the ball off the ground. So what we have to do to transition them is we have to get them to pull that heel to the butt cheek. A bit more and a little bit better because he is a soccer-style player, but he transfers his weight into the ball so good that I have not focused on changing that angle for him. So it's a variable, you know, could he get more distance on his leg getting to the ball? Yes, but in watching him perform, he kicks 50-yard field goals and contacts the ball really well. So I'm not going to ask him to load his leg much more than he is at this point. In doing that, he really doesn't need to do that. But you just have to make sure there is a bend in the knee so that the quad will engage when you get the ball contact.
Coach, I noticed on Sunday, and I noticed in this video here, that he takes a small amount of turf right there. Mm-hmm. Is that a good thing or a bad thing?
It's a thing that a lot of kids do, and once again, that's the toe just brushing the grass because you have to get to the lowest, most point in your swing before you get to the ball. And so because he has a little bit of a sweep, now if he has a descending angle that you have, that more upright angle of his leg, he wouldn't do that as much. So because he's coming in with a little lower angle to the ball, he sweeps off the ground or he makes contact with the ground with that. They absolutely have no idea that they're doing it when they're doing it because the leg speed is so fast with what he's doing.
Well, back to your quarter inch, that absolutely could be the difference in really decelerating. And like you said, if he just sweeps it, there's probably no harm done. But if he digs that in, so there's those quarter inches you're talking about.
Yeah, and actually, if he had a little bit more load or his knee was bent a little better, it would prevent him from doing that. But once again, at this stage of what we're working with him on, a lot of guys and most guys will do that, particularly when you first start them out. And as long as they're accelerating, it won't have any effect. But if they're decelerating, like you mentioned, and they hit that, then it has a significant effect on the ball contact, where they contact the ball. So,
right. So we're at contact.
Yeah, and a big thing here is he's got to have his foot, the toes of his foot depressed so that he can hit the top of the arch of his foot. And if you go back one keyframe, we'll see how he starts that position. So you'll see when we get to the accelerator footstep, or if you just rewind it just a little bit for me, you can see how depressed that his toe is. So even there, he's squeezing the toe in the front of his shoe there so that at the top of his arch as it comes through is going to hit the inside panel of the ball. So that's the other significant thing at contact. If your toe is cupped, in other words, if your toe leads, that's when you see a ball flight where it's not perfectly end over end. Okay? Here's a real good picture of that. As his foot comes in, we can talk about the width of his foot away from the ball also, but as his foot comes in, you'll see that his toe is pointed out, and he's hitting the top arch of the ball on the inside panel. Now, to you, it might look like he's hitting the seam, but in actuality, because his toe is pointing, the arch will hit that inside panel. Now, where we want to hit on the ball is important, too.
Now, take me through this. The first thing I notice is that the ball is tilted away.
Yes.
Tell me why.
We do that because the angle of his foot is such that if we tilt the ball, it exposes the sweet spot. It turns the sweet spot about an inch to the right, and that matches up really good with the angle of his foot. If we have it straight up and down, then he has a tendency to want to pull inside to get to that spot. And so instead of having him pull his hips and change the rhythm of his swing, we want to move that ball just a little bit to change where that sweet spot is.
So let's show me exactly the sweet spot. I know when we filmed on Sunday, you talked about the equator of the ball, and then you also talked about the stripes.
Yes. The stripes on a high school ball give you a good indication. So you're drawing the bottom stripe there. Right between those stripes on the left side, the left panel, that's right where the sweet spot is right there. That's where the top of the arch of your foot needs to hit the ball. Because remember, you're doing a rotational, so your swing is coming inside that line. It's going to square up at that spot, and then it's going to stay square about 6 to 8 inches, and then your leg will go back across. So it makes a little bit of a rotational circle there. And as you can see, that's where he's hitting it. That will produce the end-over-end kick that you want. The angle of release, so that as you come in, you want to be a descending blow and ascending blow. And then if you'll continue to ascend up like his foot is there, that controls the amount of height you get on the ball. So when somebody kicks one low, their angle of approach is too shallow. It's too they didn't load their leg and descend at the ball. They came in and basically just swept the ball off the tee. So that controls this controls the end over end of the ball.
Let's match up the yellow circle there. And you also had Cole, who was a first-time kicker there on Sunday, and you talked to him about where to hit the ball. But let's talk about the shoe. So you drew on Cole's shoe as well, and tell me where you want to match up to that yellow circle.
Okay, from the top, the second lace in, right there between the tip of the Nike.
Okay.
That's where you want to go, right in that area. That's where the big bone of your foot is, and it could be moved over maybe just a little bit, but right in that area where the top of the arch is. So
you say move it
to the left just about, a quarter of an inch. Keep going. Yeah, right in there. That's perfect. That's where they're aiming to drive that right through the inside panel of the ball, and that's where their eyes should be looking, right at that spot. If they do that, then you'll see an end-over-end tumbling kick. But if they don't do that and they hit the right panel or they hit the seam, okay, if you put a little circle on the right side of that, if they hit that side of the ball or anywhere in there, then you're going to see the ball have a hook to it. So it's going to travel to their left of a right-footed kicker. It's going to the left, okay, because they came outside and across the ball. It's going to go that way. Even if they were to hit, if you draw a red circle that overlaps the correct spot, but most of it is right in the seam, to the right there a little bit. Keep going. Yeah, right in there. If they hit that, you'll see a little bit of a draw to the ball, and that's not good. We want to hit it perfectly straight, and we can hit it perfectly straight. So when you hear somebody say, well, he's got a little draw, that's not a good thing because you can't control that into the wind, or you can't control, exactly the amount of draw you have. And if you start the ball just inside the left upright and it draws, it's going to go outside. So everything I teach is about hitting the ball dead straight and hitting that contact point. But I also teach them that the ball flight will tell you where you hit the ball. So you need to watch the ball flight to tell you what part of the ball you contacted.
Once again, these parallels are interesting because that yellow circle is really the path or the inside track to a golf ball. I mean, if you've ever sliced the ball like I have, you find out pretty quickly that you're hitting the seam, the first red circle, or like you said, the outside red circles.
No, you're exactly right, Chaz. It's all the same thing. Anytime you have a rotational activity and you're going to try to make something fly linear, hitting a baseball, golf ball, racquetball, tennis ball, it's all the same. You know, you have to start inside, get square, and then you can finish your rotation. But the ball flight in all those sports will tell you exactly what's happened and how you adjust that. The other thing we ought to mention here, if you go back to that shoe real quick, is that one of the mistakes people make, go back to the ball. You'll notice the width that he is away. They need to be one shoe width away in order to clear their left side and have the space that their knee needs to get inside the ball. So you can see up in the left-hand corner, his knee is pointing right at that spot, and it's inside that spot.
Right.
Okay? His knee does not want to be pointing outside the ball or away from the ball. His knee is pointing inside that spot, and he's cleared his left side with the width of his left foot. And that's
another thing that I heard you say to Henry is that you talked to him about wrapping around the ball. So we drew the yellow circle. We matched it up to the red circle on the shoe. Tell me about the wrap here.
Okay. If he were too close to the ball, his foot would go to the outside panel of the ball, and it would wrap around the ball, and he would pull hook it, which he did once or twice. But so the width that your foot is away from the ball is really important to enable you to get to the inside panel. So if you move it in, that's when you start having the problem of wrapping around. The other thing that causes you to do that is your knee is pointing to the outside, and then all of a sudden you just jerk your knee inside, and in essence you're pulling your knee inside, and that causes you to pull hook the ball also, or to wrap your toe around the outside of the ball. So those two things are the variables that cause that ball flight. But that left foot should be one shoe length. So we have them take the heel, put it next to the tee, and then guys that I train that have a problem, I just make a line with a can of paint, or if I'm on a turf with some duct tape, and I tell them you got to put your foot to the left of that line. And so once they do that, it's really comfortable for them. But as you can see there, Henry's knee is pointing straight at the inside the ball, and all he has to do is just snap his knee and accelerate right up into the ball. So that's real important. Now the next step.
So last two keyframes. Take us through.
Yeah, in order to get the ball to go, you have to check and see that he exited straight to the target. And when the leg is waist high, if it's pointing at the goalpost, then it stayed straight all the way to and through the kick. So that's a common theme that you can go on YouTube and watch any elite kicker or any kicker, and on their finish, if their leg is pointing at the goalpost, and the ball will fly straight. Now also notice his knee's still bent, his shoulder's in an athletic position, so he really maximized everything that he had. The other thing that we know that he was to and through the ball accelerating is he skipped through. So he's held his body stable, he's released his left foot, which tells me he's released his hip, and he's kept his leg straight. You know, when it got parallel to the ground, it was perfectly straight, and that tells me that he can control ball flight. So if we had to be on a hash, or if it was into the wind and we needed to aim a little different, that he can control ball flight, because when that leg is parallel to the ground, it's pointing straight at the goalpost right there. It's perfect. And his body balance and posture are really good too. So that's what I call the finish, and then the follow-through is when his thigh is on his chest. So we'd like him to finish with that thigh on the chest right there, okay? So he has a little bit of extra there. And the important thing for that is so he can decelerate over a period of time that's safe for him not to get injured. So he skips through, which tells us that he released his hips. His leg was straight, which means he released the straight. And then his follow-through allowed him to decelerate his leg so he doesn't, pull his hamstring or pull something else. And then you can also see that in his follow-through, he's kept his shoulder space in the target. If you start soccer-style kickers, most of them will throw that left shoulder out, and they'll just rotate all the way through to the follow-through. And the problem with that is now we truly do have just a rotational swing instead of a rotational that becomes linear and finishes rotational. And you can't control ball flight like that.
I'm certainly seeing through this. It's a very athletic move. It's not hard to see what you said earlier. About this being so precise that it's not as easy. So
yeah, and it's the timing and it's the sequencing, and that's what we really work on to master, because there's no question when you're staring at the goalpost and there's people screaming and yelling, and you got to have you need to make it to win the game. As in any sport, you have to have great foundation and fundamentals. So we work real hard on these key frames so that when he is nervous or when the game's on the line, their body would just go into automatic pilot, and the timing and sequence will be right for them.
Well, you know what? Great athletes with a lot of preparation and a lot of foundation, good fundamentals, they make everything look easy. So with that, Coach, we've hit the 20-minute mark. Let me take one or two questions as we've got time for it. Coaches, if you've got a question, there is a question pod in your control panel. Please fire a question at us. We'll take it if we've got time. Bill, here's the first one. Matt says, my son is just starting to kick. He can make a 30-yarder, but on the next kick can scull it into the ground. Can you explain this kind of inconsistency?
Yes. The first thing that I would look at is he at the same spot to approach the ball every time. Typically, young kickers, they take their steps back and their steps over, but the step is different every time. So as I always tell them, I used to teach math. I never used steps as a measuring device. You got to use inches, feet, or yards. So I would find a spot and make him step there consistently, because most of the time, the first thing that I would check with him is he starting in the same spot? Because otherwise he'll arrive at the ball at a different time in a different sequence. So that's the first thing that I would check. If that's the same, then his swing is probably a little bit different every time. So doing the drills, and if you go to my website, you can see some of the drills that I do. Or if you go to Amazon.com/books, my drills are written up there, you know, in a nice short little coach's book that you can get and help them with that. But those are the first two things I check.
All right, and real quickly, you talked about taking a consistent step back. Talk us through. You had the kids doing steps to get aligned.
Yeah, I have a PVC pipe that's 2 yards back by 1.5 over, and I put that down and I spray paint lines for them, and you really only need to take 2 steps to kick, and 2 yards by 1.5. If you look at most pros, that's the distance that gets you to the ball on time. So, because remember, the guys are rushing you. So you can't be, if you're back too far, it's going to take you longer to get there. So I started them training like they're pros at 2 yards, 1.5 over with 2 steps. And so I've just created a PVC pipe with a little 90-degree elbow that I set that down, I put them there, and then we just go over that dry run so they get it. But I make them more memorize with their feet how many steps for them 2 yards is. And we make sure they start with the same foot every time. But generally, it's 3 steps back, 2 steps over. But the 3 steps can be elongated, and they get the difference. So you have to put marks on the ground to check them with regard to that. But 3 steps back, 2 steps over, just making sure that the steps are consistent, and check that with marks on the ground at 2 yards and 1.5 yards.
Gotcha. Okay, Coach, last question real quick from Robert. My son plays soccer and is interested in kicking. How different is a field goal kick from a corner kick?
It's different from the fact that, corner kick, you're putting spin on the ball and you're trying to make a curve somewhere. And then a football kick, you're trying to make go straight. So it is different for them. And the biggest adjustment for changing them, which I've done for 30 years, is the sweeping motion. They just don't load their heel to their butt cheek to engage their quad. A soccer guy sweep the ball more with their hip flexors. And so there is an adjustment. And if you'll see, here's Cole, who's the first time he kicked the football, but watch how he bends his knees and loads it. See right there, he's past 90. I mean, he even has a better load than Henry. So it's not a difficult adjustment because they're good ball strikers. Once you get them to load a little bit, it's a pretty good transition. Just be prepared that if they ever kick a football in a game, they'll quit soccer. And I say that semi-tongue-in-cheek because over the years, so many guys have, because the feedback that you get from people screaming and cheering and et cetera, it just kind of supersedes what they get in soccer. But it's not as difficult to make the transition. There's just a few key things they have to change. And, Henry's made the transition, and I've had over 30 years a lot of guys be able to do that. And it's a lot of fun for them.
Now I notice here we froze Cole, at the point of his accelerator step, that, he starts to be pure rotational as opposed to having some of that linear movement that we saw in Henry. Is that a soccer issue?
Yes. His knee stops and he never transfers the weight to the ball of his foot, so he's basically kicking with all his quad there. That's pretty much all he's doing. So he's not using his hips. His knee needs to slide to the ball of his foot so that his hips and body will accelerate through the ball. But yes, that would be a great analogy there. That's a soccer-style corner kick right there. Because a lot of times they'll just fall off the ball after they kick it when they do it because they're just kicking to a general area, whereas opposed to like when I train kids, I don't even train them on a high school or college upright. I train them on a 10-foot upright that I've made. So, and, you know, pros in college is 18 feet 9 inches, and high school is 23 feet 8 inches. So they're kicking on half the distance when I train them in order just to maximize learning of keeping the ball straight. So.
All right, Coach, that is our 30 minutes. Coaches, with that, let me say that I hope we've provoked some thought with this session, and I hope that you, like I am, are compelled to go out and try to kick the football over the garage tonight. These webinars are produced solely to foster the conversation to help your kids get better faster. You'll find this session recorded at getbetterfaster.tv. And up in the right-hand corner, there's a subscribe button. Please have your players, your fellow coaches go to that site, subscribe using that link, and get in the conversation with us. So for me, Chaz Henry, and my guest today, Bill Renner, we thank you for tuning in.